The air tasted like hot soup. Not a pleasant, hearty minestrone, but the forgotten dregs of a Campbell's can left in a car trunk for a week in July. Here in the manicured utopia of Pleasant Meadows, the heat wasn't just a temperature. It was a physical presence, a thick, suffocating blanket stitched with humidity and despair. And at the heart of it all, the epicenter of our collective misery, stood the community clubhouse. Or rather, outside the community clubhouse. A small, wilting crowd of about 15 of us were gathered before the gleaming glass doors of the cooling center. We looked like the saddest, sweatiest flash mob in history. Inside, bathed in the ethereal glow of fluorescent lights and the crisp, cool promise of 68-degree air, stood Karen von Stroheim. Yes, von Stroheim. She made sure you remembered the von. Karen, the president of our homeowners association, was a woman constructed from sharp angles and sharper opinions. Her blonde hair was a perfectly coiffed, unmoving helmet. Her pastel pink pantsuit was somehow immune to the oppressive heat, a testament to either a powerful antiperspirant or the fact that she was a highly advanced, cold-blooded reptile in a human suit. Right now, she was holding a key ring, dangling it from a single, bony finger. She wore the smug smirk of a Roman emperor who'd just sentenced a gladiator to become lion chow. "Please, Karen," pleaded Mrs. Gable, a woman whose age was somewhere between sweet old lady and actual fossil. Her tiny, fluffy white poodle, Fifi, was panting so hard at her feet he was practically vibrating. "My Fifi is asthmatic. The vet said he needs to stay cool." Karen's voice, thin and reedy, cut through the thick air, barely muffled by the double-paned glass. The cooling center's posted hours are 10 to 4, Monday through Friday. Today is Saturday. She tapped a perfectly manicured nail on the sign taped to the door, as if we were all illiterate. Rules are rules. They ensure our community doesn't descend into chaos. I looked around at the shimmering asphalt, the drooping heads of the prize-winning hydrangeas, and old Mr. Henderson, who looked about 2 degrees away from melting into a puddle of plaid shorts and regret. Chaos was looking pretty good right about now. At least it would be a change of pace. I'd only moved into Pleasant Meadows a month ago. My job as a freelance product designer meant I could work from anywhere, and the online brochure had promised serene suburban living. They'd left out the part about the local warlord who governed the thermostat. I was trying to keep a low profile, to be the quiet new guy who mows his lawn on time and doesn't leave his trash cans out for more than the allotted 12 hours. "She's on a tear," a voice muttered next to me. I turned to see my next-door neighbor, Dave. Dave was a friendly, doughy guy in his 40s who perpetually wore a Hawaiian shirt and cargo shorts, the unofficial uniform of suburban dads everywhere. He was a grizzled veteran of the HOA wars. Ever since they repaved the pickleball courts in slightly off-white instead of her approved egret feather, she's been looking for blood. Karen made a dramatic show of checking a delicate watch on her wrist, sighed as if we were an immense burden on her very soul, and then turned her back on us. She disappeared into the cool, dark recesses of the clubhouse, leaving us to bake. A collective groan went up from the small crowd. Defeated, people started to shuffle away, back to their sweltering homes with their overworked AC units. I watched them go, a sad parade of the overheated and the disenfranchised. I saw Mrs. Gable trying to shield Fifi with her purse. I saw the dejected slump in Mr. Henderson's shoulders. And something inside me, a little cog that had been rusted over with a desire to not make waves, suddenly broke free and started to turn. I looked at the miserable faces. I looked at the wilting petunias in the community flower beds, flowers that Karen had probably mandated be a specific Pantone shade of pink. I looked at the glorious, air-conditioned clubhouse, a fortress of comfort guarded by a tyrant in pastels. Then I looked at my phone. I pulled up an app, checked a few diagnostics, and a slow, mischievous grin spread across my face. Dave looked at me, wiping a bead of sweat from his forehead. "What are you smiling about? Got a secret plan to tunnel in?" I clapped him on the shoulder. "Something like that, Dave. Something much, much better." My grin widened. I felt a surge of adrenaline, the same kind I got when a complex design finally clicked into place. 4 minutes, I muttered to myself, the words tasting like victory. "Give me 4 minutes." 4 minutes for what? Dave asked, confused. "To engage in a little proactive problem-solving," I said, already jogging back toward my house. Or, as I'm about to call it, Operation Karen Kryptonite. Dave just stood there, watching me go, a baffled look on his face. I didn't have time to explain. The clock was ticking. My garage was my sanctuary. It smelled of sawdust, hot metal, and potential. Tucked into the back corner, under a heavy canvas tarp, was my pride and joy, my masterpiece, my baby. "What? In the Sam Hill, is that?" Dave's voice echoed from the driveway. He'd followed me, his curiosity apparently stronger than his desire to avoid heat stroke. I yanked the tarp off with a flourish. There it sat, sleek and futuristic, all brushed aluminum and smoked polycarbonate. It was a trailer, technically, but calling it a trailer was like calling the Starship Enterprise a minivan. "This, my friend," I said, running a hand along its cool, metallic flank, "is the Climate Case 5000. I'd designed it for a client, Aegis Outdoor Solutions, a company that specialized in high-end disaster relief and luxury outdoor events. It was a self-contained, mobile, rapid deployment climate control unit. I'd won it in a company-wide design competition. It was my bonus, and honestly, better than cash." "It's an apocalypse-proof party pod," I explained, unable to keep the pride out of my voice. "Military-grade insulated composite panels, a 2.5-ton, solar-assisted whisper-quiet HVAC system with its own lithium-ion battery bank. It can keep the interior at a perfect 70 degrees in the middle of Death Valley, or a balmy 80 in a blizzard. Deployable satellite dish for high-speed Wi-Fi, integrated water purifier, and a surprisingly plush interior with seating for 12. Dave was staring, slack-jawed. "You have a rolling VIP lounge in your garage?" "I'm a designer. I contain multitudes," I said, grabbing a remote control from a charging station on the wall. With a satisfying click, I powered the unit on. A low hum filled the garage. "And right now, I'm about to become the most popular guy in Pleasant Meadows." I backed my pickup truck up, the trailer hitch camera making it easy. With another button press, the trailer's automated tongue jack lifted it perfectly onto the ball hitch. A solid thunk echoed as it locked into place. "You're not serious," Dave said, though his eyes were wide with dawning excitement. "As a heart attack in this heat," I replied, climbing into the truck. A grease smudge from the hitch was now proudly displayed on my nose. I didn't care. I was a man on a mission. I backed the truck and trailer out of the driveway. It moved with a smooth, silent grace that belied its size. I drove it slowly, deliberately, down the street, a one-man parade of technological rebellion. The few neighbors who were still outside stopped and stared. I parked it directly on the street in front of the clubhouse lawn, a prime piece of community property that Karen probably considered sacred ground. I hopped out of the truck, remote in hand, and stood before my creation like a conductor before his orchestra. "And now for the grand finale," I announced to Dave, who was watching with the giddy expression of a kid on Christmas morning. I pressed the deploy button. The effect was instantaneous and beautiful. First, 4 hydraulic stabilizing jacks descended with a soft hiss, lifting the trailer slightly and leveling it with pinpoint precision. Then, the real show began. A section of the sidewall unfolded downwards, becoming a sturdy, railed porch. Simultaneously, the roof above it extended outwards, forming a large, rigid awning. With a final, satisfying whir, the main door swung open. The whole transformation took exactly 3 minutes and 47 seconds. From the open door, a visible wave of cold air washed over the scorching asphalt, a tangible promise of salvation. The trailer sat there, looking like a sleek, futuristic outpost that had just landed from a much cooler planet. The defeated neighbors, who had been slinking back to their houses, stopped. They turned. They saw it. A few brave souls, led by Mr. Henderson, started to wander over, drawn by the impossible sight and the siren song of the humming AC. I stood on the newly formed porch, gesturing grandly towards the open door. "The Pleasant Meadows Annex for sensible temperature regulation is now open," I bellowed, my voice echoing in the quiet cul-de-sac. "No shoes, no shirt, no problem." I paused, catching the eye of every single person there, and added with a pointed grin, "Just no Karens." For a moment, there was silence. Then, a smattering of applause broke out. Mr. Henderson let out a whoop. The revolution had begun. Within 10 minutes, the Climate Case 5000 had gone from a curious spectacle to the social hub of the neighborhood. It was an instant oasis. People who I'd only ever offered a cursory hello to were now my best friends, united in the glorious pursuit of not sweating through their clothes. They brought offerings. Lawn chairs appeared on the curb. Coolers filled with beer and soda were hauled over from nearby garages. Someone brought a plate of slightly too brown brownies, which were devoured in seconds. It was a spontaneous, heat-stroked block party. Inside, the trailer was a haven of cool, quiet bliss. Mrs. Gable's poodle, Fifi, was no longer vibrating. He was sprawled out on one of the plush, built-in benches, snoring softly. A group of kids had discovered the large screen monitor I'd integrated into one wall, and were now silently mesmerized by a cartoon about a talking sponge. Dave, bless his Hawaiian-shirted soul, had appointed himself as a combination bouncer and greeter, standing at the steps of the porch and welcoming people with a newfound sense of purpose. "This is amazing, man," he said, handing me a cold bottle of water. "Absolutely amazing." The air was filled not just with conditioned air, but with a sense of rebellious camaraderie. The conversation flowed freely, lubricated by shared hardship and cheap beer. And the main topic, of course, was Karen. It turned out my little cooling center had become a confessional. Neighbors who had previously been too intimidated to speak up were now trading horror stories about Karen von Stroheim's reign of terror. "Remember the mailbox uniformity edict of 22? A woman named Cynthia chimed in. "She sent out violation notices because my mailbox was creamy off-white instead of the mandated architectural beige." I had to show her paint chips to prove they were identical. "That's nothing," countered a man who introduced himself as Bill. Last fall, she led the great, unauthorized garden gnome purge. Went through the neighborhood with a clipboard and a little red wagon confiscating any gnome that wasn't on the pre-approved list. Called them tacky lawn ornaments. My little Bartholomew was a fisherman. A fisherman? What's tacky about that? I was holding court, leaning against the doorframe, feeling like a reluctant but increasingly smug hero. I explained the trailer's features to a small, adoring crowd, glossing over the technical specs and focusing on the important stuff, like the built-in bottle opener and the surprisingly good acoustics of the sound system. It was in the middle of this festive scene that she appeared. Like a malevolent apparition, Karen von Stroheim emerged from the clubhouse. If she was angry before, she was now a walking thundercloud in a pantsuit. Her face was a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. She marched across the clubhouse lawn, her sensible walking shoes squishing slightly in the overly watered grass she was so proud of. Every resident fell silent. The laughter died. The music seemed to fade. All eyes were on the approaching storm. She stopped at the edge of my deployed porch, hands on her hips, her entire body vibrating with indignation. "What?" she sputtered, her voice an octave higher than before. "Is the meaning of this monstrosity?" I took a slow sip of my water, leaned casually against the trailer door, and gave her my most placid smile. "This, Karen, is a cooling center. You know, for the community? The one you locked? Ring any bells?" From somewhere behind her, someone snickered. Her head whipped around, trying to pinpoint the source of the dissent. But we were a united front of sweaty, grinning faces. Her attention snapped back to me. From somewhere within her pastel blazer, she materialized the HOA rule book. I swear, the thing just appeared in her hand like a magic trick. She brandished it at me like a cross to a vampire. "This is a flagrant violation of Section 7, Paragraph B, Subsection C of the HOA bylaws regarding temporary structures and unapproved vehicle parking," she shrieked, her voice cracking. I pushed myself off the doorframe and took a step forward, a playful glint in my eye. "That's an interesting point, Karen, but that brings up a fascinating legal and philosophical question." I paused for dramatic effect, winking at Dave. "Is it a vehicle or is it a structure? Because I've got registration for it as a recreational vehicle. But once deployed, it has a fixed foundation via the hydraulic jacks, which could argue for its classification as a temporary structure. I've got paperwork for both. Let's debate." Karen was momentarily speechless. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked like a goldfish trying to comprehend calculus. Defeated in the face of my cheerful pedantry, she resorted to her modern weapon of choice. She whipped out her phone and started taking pictures, her fingers jabbing furiously at the screen. "There will be repercussions," she finally managed to say. "Serious repercussions. I am reporting this to the authorities." She spun on her heel and stormed off, dialing furiously on her phone as she marched back toward her own house, the one with the immaculately, almost terrifyingly perfect lawn. The moment she was out of earshot, the cul-de-sac erupted in cheers. Someone put the music back on, a little louder this time. The party was back on. I had won the battle, but I had a sinking feeling Karen von Stroheim was just getting ready for war. An hour and several traded war stories later, the inevitable happened. A police car, gleaming white and official, cruised slowly into the cul-de-sac. It didn't use its siren, but it might as well have. The music was cut, conversations halted, and a wave of nervous energy washed over our little rebel encampment. The car parked behind my truck. A police officer climbed out, and I could feel his weariness from 20 yards away. He was tall, with a salt and pepper mustache, and an aura that screamed, "I'd rather be anywhere else." His name tag read Miller, and right behind him, like a vengeful shadow, was Karen, pointing a triumphant, accusatory finger at the Climate Case 5000. "That's it, officer. That's the illegal structure," she declared, her voice carrying across the now silent street. Officer Miller ignored her, his eyes doing a slow, methodical scan of the scene. He saw the trailer, my truck, the crowd of neighbors in lawn chairs, and me, standing on the porch, a half-empty bottle of water in my hand. He sighed, a deep, profound sigh that spoke of a long career dealing with petty squabbles. He ambled over. "Son," he began, his voice calm and even, "I'm going to need you to tell me what's going on here." I made a conscious decision to be the most reasonable, respectful person he would meet all day. I came down the steps to meet him on the pavement, extending a hand. "Leo Maxwell, officer. Nice to meet you, though I wish it were under better circumstances. He shook my hand. His grip was firm. Officer Miller, the dispatcher said something about an unauthorized block party and an illegal commercial vehicle. Karen scurried over. It's a public nuisance, officer. Look at this unauthorized congregation and the noise. It's a clear violation of the peace. I kept my focus on Miller. With all due respect, ma'am, I said to Karen without looking at her, then turned back to the officer. Sir, here's the situation. We're in the middle of a record-breaking heat wave. The community cooling center, I gestured to the dark clubhouse, was locked by the HOA president because it's a Saturday. We have elderly residents, kids, pets. I was concerned about public health. This trailer is my personal property. It has air conditioning. I offered to share it with my neighbors. He's lying, Karen interjected. He's trying to start some kind of suburban insurgency. Officer Miller held up a hand to silence her, a gesture he seemed to have perfected over many years. He turned to me. Your personal property, you say? Yes, sir, I said. I'm a product designer. This was a prototype I won. It's legally registered as a recreational vehicle. A recreational vehicle? Miller's eyebrows went up slightly. He seemed intrigued. That's right. I can show you the registration. He nodded slowly, his eyes scanning the crowd. He saw Mrs. Gable fanning a sleeping Fifi. He saw the kids drinking juice boxes. He saw a group of men quietly discussing lawn care techniques around a cooler. It wasn't exactly a scene of hedonistic chaos. He walked over to Mrs. Gable. Ma'am, is this gentleman causing a problem? Mrs. Gable stood up, her back suddenly ramrod straight. Officer, this young man is a hero, a saint. Karen had us all out here, ready to perish from the vapors, and he provided us with this wonderful cool box. He probably saved my Fifi's life. Miller nodded, his expression unreadable, and came back to me. So it's an RV, you say, legally parked? As far as I know, sir, it's not blocking any driveways or fire hydrants. Karen was practically vibrating. But the bylaws, officer, Section 12, subsection F, no recreational vehicle shall be parked for more than 24 hours without approval from the Architectural Review Committee. Officer Miller finally turned to face her fully. Ma'am, with all due respect, I don't enforce HOA bylaws. I enforce city ordinances and state laws. As far as I can tell, this is a legally registered and parked RV. There's no law against a man running the AC in his own vehicle. And these people seem, well, they seem pretty peaceful. He let out another one of his profound sighs. I don't see a criminal offense here. This is an HOA matter. The words hung in the air. An HOA matter. To Karen, it was a mortal insult. To me, it was the most beautiful phrase in the English language. An HOA matter? She gasped, aghast. This is anarchy. This is a complete breakdown of civilized society. It's a Saturday, ma'am, Miller said, his voice flat. He turned back to me. Try to be a good neighbor, son. Keep the noise down. Don't escalate things. He gave me a look, a silent plea from one man to another. Then he gave Karen a look that clearly said, please don't call me again for this. With a final nod, he walked back to his patrol car, climbed in, and drove away, leaving Karen fuming on the curb. A quiet, triumphant cheer rippled through the crowd. I had faced the law, and the law had shrugged and told my nemesis to handle it herself. It was a major victory. The balance of power in Pleasant Meadows had just shifted, and it was shifting toward a 2.5-ton box of glorious refrigerated air. As evening approached, the oppressive heat finally began to relent, replaced by a balmy, pleasant twilight. Our little encampment, however, was still going strong. I'd deployed the trailer's optional LED string light package, and the area around the Climate Case 5000 was now bathed in a soft, festive glow. The party had entered its second wind. It was then that a new vehicle appeared, this one far more disruptive than the police cruiser. A large, noisy, slightly battered work truck rumbled down the street and ground to a halt. Emblazoned on the side, in bold, no-nonsense lettering was "Gus's Gusset and Gantry, we build it, you brag about it." The driver's side door creaked open, and a mountain of a man unfolded himself from the cab. This was Gus. Gus was built like a vending machine and had a booming voice that could curdle milk. A thick Boston accent clung to his every word. He was the owner, lead engineer, and chief sausage eater of the company that had built the frame and mechanicals for my trailer. I'd called him earlier under the pretense of a routine warranty check. "Leo, my boy," he boomed, his voice echoing off the houses. He strode toward me, a huge grin on his face. "What's this I hear about you starting a revolution in the suburbs? The Climate Case 5000 wasn't designed for overthrowing local tyrants, but I love the initiative." I met him with a handshake, which was more like having my hand swallowed by a baseball glove. "Gus, thanks for coming out. Just wanted to make sure everything was running to spec under heavy usage." Gus clapped me on the back, nearly sending me through the porch railing. "Kid, this thing could provide climate control for a forward operating base in Afghanistan. A little neighborhood spat ain't gonna make it break a sweat." He was an instant hit. He had the easy charm of a man who is completely, unapologetically himself. He'd also brought a cooler of his own, from which he produced a string of questionable-looking homemade sausages and a small, portable grill. Within minutes, the smell of sizzling meat joined the festive atmosphere. Naturally, this was the moment Karen chose to reappear. This time she came armed not with a rule book, but with a tape measure and a clipboard. She was in full documentation mode. She marched onto the lawn and began meticulously measuring distances. The trailer to the curb, the trailer to the fire hydrant, the trailer to her own prize-winning rose bushes across the street. She was a woman possessed, scribbling frantic notes on her clipboard. Gus watched her, a piece of sausage halfway to his mouth. "Yikes," he muttered to me, his voice a low rumble. "You got a real live one there. The Bylaw Banshee 3000 model. Very high maintenance, those are." Ignoring him, Karen marched right up to the porch, her eyes blazing. She directed her fury not at me, but at the largest available target. "Is this your apparatus?" she demanded of Gus. "It is not up to the community's aesthetic standards." Gus took a huge, deliberate bite of his sausage, chewed thoughtfully for a moment, and then swallowed. He looked Karen up and down, then gestured with his tongs at the Climate Case 5000. "Lady," he said, his voice dripping with condescension, "this apparatus has a higher structural integrity rating than your entire clubhouse. I built the chassis myself. It's designed to withstand a Category 3 hurricane and sustained winds of up to 120 miles per hour. I'm pretty sure it can handle your aesthetic standards." Karen was momentarily thrown. She was used to people cowering before her clipboard. She was not used to being verbally bulldozed by a man who looked like he could arm wrestle a forklift. "This is an emergency," she declared, changing tactics. "I am calling an emergency meeting of the Homeowners Association for tomorrow afternoon. We will vote to have this illegal structure forcibly removed at the owner's expense." With that, she turned on her heel and stormed away, her final threat hanging in the air. But something was different this time. No one was scared. Gus's presence, Officer Miller's ruling, and a day of shared rebellion had emboldened everyone. Dave clapped me on the shoulder. "An emergency meeting, huh? Well, I guess we'll all have to be there." Mrs. Gable chimed in. "I'll be there, and so will Fifi." A chorus of agreement rose from the crowd. They weren't just a collection of neighbors anymore. They were a movement. A movement fueled by spite, camaraderie, and Gus's surprisingly delicious sausages. The stage was set for the final showdown. Sunday afternoon, the clubhouse. My trailer versus her tyranny. It was going to be epic. The next afternoon, the community clubhouse was packed. It felt like every single resident of Pleasant Meadows had shown up. The air inside was thick, stuffy, and hot. In a masterful, petty power move, Karen had refused to turn on the air conditioning for the meeting. The irony was so thick you could taste it. We were all gathered in a sweltering room to debate the merits of my personal cooling center. The atmosphere was tense. On one side of the room sat my supporters, a motley crew of Hawaiian shirts, poodle-clutching seniors, and young families. I sat in the front row with Dave on one side, and Gus, who had refused to leave, on the other. Gus looked profoundly out of place in the chintzy meeting room, like a bear that had wandered into a dollhouse. At a folding table at the front of the room sat the opposition, Karen von Stroheim, flanked by her two loyal cronies, a sour-faced woman named Carol and a perpetually frowning man named Bob. They looked like the world's most depressing folk band. Karen banged a small gavel on the table. This emergency meeting of the Pleasant Meadows Homeowners Association will now come to order, she announced, her voice dripping with venom. The sole item on today's agenda is the flagrant violation of community standards by the resident at 112 Arbor Lane, Mr. Leo Maxwell. She clicked a button on a remote, and a projector screen behind her flickered to life. Thus began the slideshow from hell. It was a masterclass in passive-aggressive presentation. There were unflattering, slightly out-of-focus pictures of my trailer, taken from low angles to make it look as menacing as possible. There were close-ups of the tires on the grass. There was a slide with a long, bulleted list of every conceivable bylaw violation, written in a dramatic, blood-red font. "This deplorable eyesore," Karen narrated, her voice trembling with manufactured outrage, "is a threat to our community's integrity. It's a threat to our property values. It has created a carnival atmosphere, attracting riffraff and encouraging public rabble-rousing." Her cronies, Carol and Bob, nodded gravely, muttering things like, "Hear, hear," and "a disgrace." When the pathetic slideshow was finally over, Karen plastered a severe look on her face. "The board proposes an immediate motion to have the offending vehicle and structure towed and impounded, with all fees and a punitive fine of $500 levied against the homeowner. I now open the floor for discussion, though I can't imagine there's much to discuss." She expected silence. She expected the usual cowed obedience. She did not get it. Before I could even stand up, a frail, familiar voice piped up from the back. "I'd like to say something." All heads turned. It was Mrs. Gable, standing with little Fifi tucked into the crook of her arm. "Karen," she said, her voice surprisingly strong. "That trailer, that deplorable eyesore, probably saved my Fifi's life. He was in genuine distress. Furthermore," she added, her gaze sweeping the room, "it was the first time I've spoken to my neighbors on the right, the Hendersons, in 3 years. We had a lovely chat over by that young man's porch. It was nice." A murmur of agreement went through the room. Then a young father, a guy named Mike, who I'd seen playing with his kids at the trailer, stood up. "My kids have been miserable, cooped up inside all week. Yesterday they played with other kids from the neighborhood for hours. They laughed, they ran around. It felt like a real community, not just a bunch of houses." Then it was Dave's turn. He stood, his hands in the pockets of his cargo shorts, and spoke from the heart. "I've lived here for 15 years, he began, "and somewhere along the way we stopped being neighbors. We started worrying more about the approved shades of beige for our mailboxes than about the people living next to us. This community has become sterile and unfriendly, all because we're afraid of breaking some rule in that book." He pointed at Karen's sacred tome. Ironically, it took a giant, air-conditioned trailer parked illegally on the street to bring us all together. The room erupted in applause. Karen's face had gone from pink to a deep, blotchy red. She banged her gavel. "This is not a debate about feelings, it's about rules!" Finally, I stood up. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't use anger. I used logic and a little bit of humor. "Folks," I began, making eye contact with as many people as I could. "Let's be honest. It's a trailer. It's a very nice trailer," I added with a wink toward Gus, who beamed. "But it's just a trailer. It's not a permanent addition to the neighborhood. It was a temporary solution to a temporary problem. A problem that was created when someone decided that the rules on a sign were more important than the well-being of the people they're supposed to serve." I let that sink in for a moment before I played my trump card. "But this whole experience has made me realize something," I continued, pulling out my phone. "We have a beautiful clubhouse, but it has its limits. It's only open on weekdays, and as we've all experienced, this room gets pretty hot." I connected my phone to the projector, and Karen's list of violations was replaced by a new image. It was a professional 3D rendering. I'd stayed up half the night working on it, fueled by coffee and spite. It showed the clubhouse, but with a gorgeous, all-weather pavilion added to the side. It had a soaring wood-beam roof, retractable glass walls for year-round use, comfortable modern seating, built-in gas grills, and a roof covered in sleek, efficient solar panels. "I'm a designer," I said simply. "This is what I do. I propose we use some of our HOA funds, the same funds I hear were going to be used to repave the pickleball courts, to build a permanent, beautiful, year-round community space. A real cooling center in the summer, and a heated, enclosed pavilion in the cooler months. Something everyone can use whenever they want. A place to actually be neighbors." The room was stunned into silence. Jaws were literally agape. They had come for a fight. I had given them a vision. Then the silence was broken by a booming voice. "And I'll tell you what," Gus shouted, standing up to his full, imposing height. "My company, Gus's Gusset and Gantry, would be happy to offer a significant discount on the construction, a neighborly rate. We'll even throw in a commercial-grade BBQ to get things started. For the community." That did it. The room exploded. It wasn't just applause, it was a roar of approval. People were on their feet, cheering, patting me and Gus on the back. Karen was sputtering, banging her gavel uselessly, trying to find a rule against unauthorized proposals of awesome ideas. A woman in the front row, Cynthia of the creamy off-white mailbox, stood up. "I make a motion," she yelled over the din. "I make a motion to officially censure Karen von Stroheim for dereliction of duty and misuse of power. And I further move that we form a new planning committee, headed by Leo Maxwell, to officially explore this new pavilion project." "Second," Dave roared. Karen's face was a study in defeated fury. "You can't do that, it's not on the agenda." "We're making it the agenda," someone shouted from the back. The vote was a landslide. A sea of hands went up in my favor. When Karen called for the nays, only 3 hands were raised, her own, Carol's, and Bob's. She had been utterly and publicly dethroned. A week later, the heat wave had broken. A cool breeze rustled the leaves in the trees of Pleasant Meadows. I was in front of the clubhouse, packing up my trailer. The stabilizing jacks retracted with a soft hiss, and the porch folded back into the side of the unit, slick as ever. My work here was done. Dave came over, carrying 2 cold bottles of beer. He handed one to me. "You know," he said, taking a long sip, "for a guy who just wanted to be left alone, you sure did shake things up, Mr. Chairman of the Pavilion Committee." I laughed, the sound echoing in the now peaceful cul-de-sac. "Hey, I just wanted some AC. The suburban revolution was just an unintentional side effect." We stood there for a moment, drinking our beers in comfortable silence. The Pavilion Committee's first meeting was on Tuesday. Gus had already sent over preliminary material estimates at a ridiculously low price. Mrs. Gable had volunteered to head up the Landscaping and Flower Subcommittee. Things were happening. As I was hooking the trailer up to my truck, I saw a familiar figure. It was Karen, walking her dog on the opposite side of the street. She was avoiding looking in our direction, her gaze fixed firmly ahead. But just as she passed, she turned her head ever so slightly. She didn't make eye contact. She didn't smile, but she gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't forgiveness. It was a truce, an acknowledgement of a new world order. And for now, that was enough. I climbed into my truck and looked at the Climate Case 5000 in my rearview mirror. It had served its purpose honorably. Then I looked at the clubhouse, at the empty space beside it, where a new, better idea would soon stand. I took a final sip of my beer and smiled. I had come to Pleasant Meadows looking for quiet solitude, a place to work without distraction. Instead, I'd found a neighborhood full of people who just needed a little push, or a giant air-conditioned trailer, to become neighbors again. Maybe, I thought, as I drove my glorious Karen Kryptonite back to its lair, just maybe, a little bit of chaos was exactly what this place needed. And maybe, just maybe, I'd finally found a place I could call home,